Thank you. Thanks, Jem. Good morning, Melanie. Good morning, Kevin. I wanted to ask you briefly about the CMA report and the Digital Markets Unit. Just firstly, can you just give us your general take on the CMA report and how it moves us on?
So I think it's very helpful that the government have confirmed that they want to set up a digital markets unit under the CMA. And the CMA's own report last week, which we contributed to, we worked very closely in partnership with that task force and indeed seconded some staff to it, I also support. I think it makes a lot of sense to be setting up an economic regime to look across all sectors at the impact of the platforms and their market dominance, alongside setting up a regime for the specific issues around social media and online harms, which will be a sectoral regime. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Clearly, there are going to be lots of boundary issues for us to manage. We're used to that. We do it already in a number of different areas, but I think these will be deeper and will require more effort by us as regulators, which we're thinking about very actively at the moment.
Thank you. So I really wanted to probe on this a little bit, both whether this new unit, the Digital Markets Unit, is going to have the teeth necessary to address some of these issues, but also if the scope is right. I mean, obviously, what the CMA has opined on, it fundamentally, it's a competition body. It's fundamentally about making sure that markets work primarily to the benefit of their customers. That's what markets are for. And here, of course, the customer is the advertiser. But I just wonder the extent to which you think the problems that we have in this marketplace are really about detriment to that customer or detriment to others, and whether the scope, the remit of the Digital Markets Unit is going to be sufficient in covering those detriments.
So I think the CMA's focus will be, and indeed should be, on the final consumer and not just the intermediate consumer of the advertiser, as you say. One of the problems with these markets, though, is that there isn't really any pricing in the traditional sense. So we rarely pay for using social media platforms or search platforms and so on as final consumers. And that means that supply chain through from the platform to all of us sitting in our own homes is more opaque than usual. And that makes market intervention, I think, more challenging. But I think the overall scope, I mean, obviously the government's going to need to take this forward and flesh it out. It's going to need to think about sanctions and teeth and so on. But I think the broad scope of looking in a cross-sectoral way, focusing on the big platforms, is sensible and will fit quite well with the online harms regime.
So, following Kevin's question earlier, you're not really supposed to say challenging anymore for the rest of this session.
I do apologise for using the word challenging. Old habits die hard.
So look, a repeated issue that we've heard on this committee is about creators of quality, and here's a word I shouldn't use, quality content, like news, entertainment, drama, and all the rest of it, and making sure that, or the lack of sufficient recompense for some of those providers in the online space because of the way the advertising market works. That, by the way, goes for newspapers as well, not only for broadcasters. So that's not, strictly speaking, an issue. I mean, ultimately, it's an issue about the end consumer and whether they get served up, they get provided enough high quality content. But it's probably not something that a competition authority would think of as its primary responsibility. So again, I'm interested to know your thoughts on the extent to which this new unit really is equipped to think about that broader picture and to act against detriment.
So if you're talking about news publishing specifically, and
not only news, news clearly part of it, but high cost, high quality, forgive me, content, which does include news. And news is probably the bit that we are most worried about, but it actually goes across the piece.
Yeah, so if you're, taking different sectors, if you're talking about broadcasting, I think we're playing in some of the prominence questions that we've set out in our report. And I wouldn't envisage that the CMA would be best placed to tackle those. And that's not what anyone's proposing, because in the end, we just need a new regulatory framework to update the one that we're familiar with. When it comes to other markets which aren't covered by those broadcasting rules, essentially we're starting with a blank sheet of paper. This isn't something where there's been regulation before. So What I think the government intends to do here is to ask the CMA to take forward the general issues around advertising and the dominance of Google and Facebook, and to use that as the first lens through which to address the issues around news publishing. Obviously, there are other countries, including Australia, which have decided on a sectoral approach instead. I've talked to Andrea Coscelli about this at the CMA already, and it is a priority, and we will certainly work with them from Ofcom and bring our expertise into play. And of course, the DMU hasn't been set up yet, so this is quite early days, but I can reassure you we will try to bring the sectoral lens in alongside that. It's a good example of the kind of cooperation that we're going to need to do as regulators.
So another problem that comes up in the advertising market is inappropriate ads. So basically through AdSense. When you have a space on your website, which is just the space for rent, you don't know what's going to go on it. And the fundamental difference now with AdSense is that ads are served up depending on who is looking rather than what they are looking at. So the entire history of advertising has been about whether it's billboards or telly or rate or whatever. The advertising goes with the medium. That is no longer the case. It now goes with the customer. So you as the asset owner don't have control over it. What are your worries, if you have any, about that, and what do you think is the appropriate public policy response?
To be honest, it's not an area where Ofcom has looked deeply. I don't know if Kevin has anything to add on this, either in relation to the broadcasting side or the online side. I mean, I think one of the balances here in thinking about all of these challenges with online regulation is where it's right to take a cross-sectoral approach, which is where the DMU will be in the lead, and where it's right for a sectoral approach. I think advertising, leans towards that cross-sectoral approach. It's not something which we as a communications regulator lead on for that reason. So I'm sorry not to be very, very helpful here. I don't have an awful lot to add. I don't know if Kevin can add anything on this.
No, only to say that we're aware the government is going to look in a separate piece of work at online advertising, and this may well be one of the issues they choose to look at in this area.
Well, on similar vein, this is going to be my last question, Chairman. The flip side of that, so you can have high quality content and a high quality asset and not know what ads are being served up on it, and in a sense the ads let down the site. It can also work the other way around. So famously, the Macedonian youngsters in 2016 used advertising revenue. Advertising revenue was the motivation for a series of what's the correct term? Engaging but unhelpful, negative and divisive social media activity, driving traffic to these websites, which then created funds through AdSense revenues. Is that something that public policy should be troubled by? And if so, which bit of public policy, the DMU or government work looking at online harms or some other area?
So if you're talking about activity which is about harmful or concerning content, and people for commercial reasons, perhaps to do with driving people to advertising, which I think is what you're describing, and that being the reason for them essentially creating and promulgating harmful or damaging content, then that's the kind of thing that I think the online harms regime would certainly be interested in. And so there will be some links that we'll need to make on online harms on the advertising side. Obviously, the government's going to set out more details of what it's intending later today. But I think it's certainly a relevant question. Yes.
So having said that was my last question, that turned out to be a fifth, because I just need to follow up. So should it be the case that a purveyor of an advertising service like AdSense, for example, should have to worry about where those ads appear?
I'm not sure I can answer that, and I apologise if I've not quite understood the question here. I don't think I have much more to add, but maybe something we could follow up in writing later. But as I say, it could well be a relevant issue, and it's the sort of thing that certainly I think we need to, I'd like to be able to give you a slightly fuller answer on that.
I think to be honest with you, we'd prefer an answer actually during this session, because I think Damien's point is pretty clear. Really, is the fact that there is and we've seen this on many occasions, where effectively disinformation and misinformation and harmful content is put on there online in order basically to get ad revenue. I'd have thought that would be something that, as the titular online harms regulator, which you're going to be very shortly, you would be very interested in and look to actually take action about, rather than sort of say, well, this may be something that policymakers want to do. I think it's something that actually is for you.
Well, as I said earlier, I certainly think that where this is part of the incentive for people to either permit or indeed to be promulgating directly harmful content, then absolutely it's something for the online harms regime to look at. What I haven't quite been able to answer, I think, is your question about understanding the link between AdSense and where ads are placed. I don't know if Kevin can say any more on this. Back to you on it.
Yeah, because this is an area I've been involved in quite a lot of discussion about, Chair, and this is a critical area. Mr. Hines is absolutely right to raise it, which is about what are the platforms actually doing to promote reliable content, particularly news content? What are they doing to demote content that users should not be exposed to in inappropriate places? And they have set out a range of things they say they're doing. This is going to be at the absolute crux of the online harms policy approach, which is to go in there and actually find out what the tech companies are actually doing and how we can introduce more incentives so that good content is promoted and that poor content is not spread so virally. So it's absolutely, it's core to the approach we'll be taking.
Should they not be able to, frankly, just take the money back off these gangs which have put out misinformation on online platforms? Should they? That surely is the solution, isn't it? That the tech companies do not share in this income, and that basically they are able to take back this money in the same way that if, for example, you had a bank withdrawal and the bank then found that withdrawal was false or had been done by had happened by accident, then you would be expected to pay that back. Surely that's the way. Just hit them in the pocket and just make sure the online platforms actually follow that through.
I think what is more robust, to be honest with you, is to stop the money going to people in Macedonian garages in the first place, and that is what we need to see. It's much easier to stop it going than to get it back, frankly, I would imagine. So, this is exactly the sort of issue that we'd be looking to approach, because it does cause harm. You get inappropriate adverts and you get quite serious misinformation and actually disinformation spread using some of these powerful tools, algorithms and so on that the platforms have. So this is one of the key things we will be addressing in due course.
So it's going to be